On 6 June 1944, Dwight Eisenhower sat alone in a small room, reading a letter he hoped he would never have to release. Outside, thousands of ships cut through dark, churning water, while millions across a wounded world held their breath. Eisenhower wasn't thinking like a conqueror that morning. He was thinking like a man, responsible for sons he would never meet. Born in Texas and shaped by the Kansas plains, he carried quiet discipline into a war that was tearing continents apart, slowly and relentlessly. By 6 June 1944, Europe had burned for nearly 5 years, and America feared the cost of failure. The beaches of Normandy waited in silence, mined and fortified. As bad weather and uncertainty closed in from every side, Eisenhower felt the weight of history, not as an abstraction, but as lives balanced on his single decision, alone. He drafted a short apology, accepting blame in advance, preparing for a defeat he refused to expect. This was the general America trusted, not for bravado, but for steadiness when everything was falling apart worldwide. Across Washington, London, and occupied Europe, radios hummed with rumor, fear, and prayer. In that moment, power wasn't loud. It was measured in restraint and resolve, quietly, intentionally. Eisenhower folded the letter away, stepped into destiny, and gave the order that would define him forever. The world would soon learn his name, but first, it would feel the weight of his decision everywhere. On 7 June 1944, smoke drifted above Normandy. While reports arrived faster than certainty, Eisenhower moved through headquarters tense, calm on the surface, absorbing loss and fragile success methodically. Paratroopers were scattered. Units were pinned down. Beaches ran red despite the breakthrough. Yet the invasion held barely because Eisenhower trusted imperfect men over perfect plans, deliberately. In the days that followed, he resisted pressure for reckless speed, choosing consolidation over spectacle quietly. Patton demanded freedom to charge. Montgomery demanded time to prepare. Eisenhower balanced both carefully. He understood that alliance politics could fracture victory faster than enemy guns, especially under stress, constantly. On 12 June 1944, he approved a slow grind inland, trading headlines for survival. Civilians suffered as towns became battlegrounds. A cost Eisenhower carried privately every night. He visited wounded soldiers, spoke without scripts, and listened more than he commanded, intentionally. Unlike generals who sought glory, Eisenhower sought cohesion, believing unity was the real weapon. By 20 June 1944, storms smashed supply lines, threatening to undo the landings. Again, Eisenhower chose patience, refusing panic, trusting logistics would recover eventually. His restraint frustrated critics, but it preserved the fragile bridge between armies, nations, and egos. This was leadership in erosion, not triumph, shaped by pressure and consequence daily. As July approached, the war demanded its next gamble, and Eisenhower prepared to spend blood wisely. By 25 July 1944, Eisenhower faced a stalled front in Normandy. Thick with hedgerows and exhaustion, American divisions bled forward yard by yard under Eisenhower's watchful gaze. While German defenses hardened, Operation Cobra was approved, not with confidence, but with necessity and time running out. Eisenhower authorized saturation bombing, knowing friendly lines lay dangerously close, trusting risk over paralysis. On 25 July 1944, bombs tore gaps through German lines, and the front finally cracked. Patton surged through the breach, armor racing west and south, chasing momentum Eisenhower unleashed without pause. The gamble worked, but success bred danger, as German forces recoiled toward encirclement. At Falaise, in August 1944, Eisenhower weighed closure against caution again. Critics later argued he hesitated, allowing enemy escape, but he feared Allied collision more. Eisenhower chose coordination over annihilation deliberately, preserving alliance trust at terrible tactical cost. Paris would soon be free, but the war demanded endurance, not celebration. Eisenhower knew momentum could intoxicate leaders, and restraint would soon be tested again. As autumn approached, clouds gathered in the Ardennes, quietly, unseen by most. On 16 December 1944, Eisenhower was awakened before dawn, as frantic reports cut through the cold. German armor had smashed through the Ardennes, shattering thin American lines in deep winter fog. Maps showed a bulge forming, dangerous and humiliating, threatening Antwerp and Allied morale. For many commanders, panic crept in quickly, but Eisenhower absorbed the shock steadily. He understood this was Hitler's last gamble, fueled by desperation and weather, not strength. Within hours, Eisenhower acted, shifting armies like a chessboard under fire decisively. He granted Patton permission to pivot north, a move planned in advance, revealing quiet foresight. On 19 December 1944, Eisenhower addressed commanders, demanding clarity and unity, not excuses. Bastogne was surrounded. Soldiers were freezing and starving, yet Eisenhower refused withdrawal. He knew symbolic ground could anchor morale, even as men paid the price brutally. Eisenhower accepted casualties as tragic currency, not lightly, but as necessity. Weather grounded aircraft, limiting air power, testing Eisenhower's patience relentlessly. He trusted the skies would clear, and when they did, the balance would return. By 23 December 1944, clouds broke, and Allied aircraft roared back. The German advance slowed, then bled out under combined pressure. Eisenhower's calm held the line, where louder men might have fractured it. Victory here was not elegant, it was survival, earned through endurance. As January approached, the war shifted again toward Germany itself at last. On 25 January 1945, Eisenhower studied maps that now pointed east. Toward the heart of Germany, the Bulge had been crushed, but the cost lingered in frozen graves and broken units everywhere. Eisenhower resisted calls for triumphal speed, choosing methodical pressure over reckless advance. Again, he understood Germany was wounded, not dead, and desperation still carried claws. As Allied armies crossed the Rhine, Eisenhower faced a decision that would define the war's end. Berlin lay ahead, symbolic and tempting, but Eisenhower saw something others ignored quietly. On 28 March 1945, he chose to halt a direct race for Berlin, stunning many commanders. Instead, he ordered a southern thrust, aimed at splitting German forces and crushing resistance completely. Critics accused him of surrendering prestige, but Eisenhower valued lives over flags deliberately. He believed political victory meant little if soldiers paid the unnecessary price. As camps were liberated, Eisenhower demanded documentation, forcing the world to see truth, unfiltered. He walked through death camps himself, shaken and resolute, knowing denial would follow later. On 12 April 1945, news arrived that Roosevelt was dead, deepening the burden. Eisenhower felt history tightening, leadership passing to quieter hands suddenly. Germany was collapsing, cities burning, civilians fleeing as Allied lines closed in. Yet Eisenhower's focus remained disciplined, preventing chaos from turning victory hollow. The war was nearly over, but peace would require steadiness, not celebration. Eisenhower prepared for surrender and for the far harder task beyond it. On 7 May 1945, Eisenhower stood at Reims as Germany signed its surrender quietly. There was no triumph in his posture, only exhaustion and relief, tempered by memory. The war in Europe was over, but the world Eisenhower faced was fractured, unstable, raw. Millions were displaced. Cities were rubble. Vengeance whispered through liberated lands everywhere. Eisenhower ordered discipline above all, fearing chaos more than resistance immediately. He understood victory without order could rot into something unrecognizable. Quickly, as military governor, Eisenhower now commanded peace, a task harder than war, silently. On 10 May 1945, he directed troops to halt reprisals, protecting civilians and prisoners alike. Hunger stalked Germany, and Eisenhower approved food shipments. Despite public anger back home, he believed starvation bred extremism, and history had proven that lesson painfully. Former enemies became wards of responsibility, not targets of humiliation by his command. Eisenhower rejected calls for mass punishment, insisting justice must be deliberate, not emotional. Across Europe, displaced persons camps swelled, filled with survivors carrying unspeakable loss. Eisenhower demanded documentation continue, ensuring memory would outlive denial forever. As the Pacific War raged on, pressure mounted for redeployment and closure. Yet Eisenhower remained anchored in Europe, stabilizing ground that could still ignite. He knew America's trust had not ended with surrender. It had deepened. Leadership now meant restraint, empathy, and the courage to rebuild former enemies. The general who won the war now faced its shadow longer and quieter. On 6 July 1945, Eisenhower traveled through a Europe still trembling despite the silence of guns. Ruined cities stretched endlessly, their civilians moving like ghosts through shattered streets slowly. Eisenhower met mayors, priests, and survivors, listening more than speaking, absorbing grief. He believed authority demanded witnessing consequences, not hiding behind reports deliberately. Across Germany, occupation zones hardened into lines that hinted at future conflict quietly. The Soviet presence loomed, disciplined and suspicious, altering the meaning of victory subtly. Eisenhower sensed the alliance was thinning, trust eroding beneath shared triumph inevitably. On 18 July 1945, he received word of a new weapon tested in the desert. Though not directly involved, Eisenhower felt unease, recognizing power without precedent instantly. He warned that military solutions could not replace political wisdom, especially now. As refugees continued to pour westward, Eisenhower pressed Washington for resources urgently. He feared neglect would plant seeds of another catastrophe later. At Potsdam, leaders debated borders and futures. While Eisenhower observed limits of force, the general who once commanded armies now navigated fragile diplomacy, constrained but influential. Eisenhower understood peace required patience equal to war, if not more. He worked to stabilize institutions, police forces, and basic services quietly. Every decision carried echoes of the past decade, haunting and instructive. The world was reorganizing, and Eisenhower stood at its uncertain hinge. On 14 August 1945, news of Japan's surrender spread across Europe, ending the global war. Celebrations erupted, but Eisenhower remained restrained, aware of wounds still open everywhere. Victory had come through unimaginable force, and the balance of power had shifted permanently. Eisenhower worried the atomic age would reward impatience, not wisdom dangerously. He urged leaders to demobilize carefully, fearing abrupt withdrawals would destabilize fragile nations. Millions of soldiers longed for home, while millions of civilians feared abandonment simultaneously. Eisenhower approved phased returns, balancing morale with responsibility meticulously. Across Germany, black markets thrived, hunger persisted, and order remained fragile. Eisenhower pushed economic revival as security policy, not charity, firmly. Factories reopened, infrastructure repaired, and schools resumed under military oversight gradually. He believed dignity prevented radicalism, a lesson burned into history. As Cold War tensions hardened, Eisenhower warned against permanent fear-shaping policy. He saw how quickly allies could become rivals through suspicion alone. On 20 September 1945, Eisenhower prepared to leave Europe, his task complete. He declined grand ceremonies, preferring quiet transition to civilian authority characteristically. The general who carried war's weight now stepped into reflection, changed but composed. America still trusted him, sensing steadiness mattered beyond battlefields. Eisenhower returned home, carrying lessons the nation would soon need. On 1 October 1945, Eisenhower arrived in America, greeted by applause and expectation. Crowds cheered victory, but Eisenhower's expression remained measured, shaped by memory. He toured cities untouched by war, yet deeply altered by its cost, silently. Eisenhower spoke carefully, avoiding triumphal language, warning against complacency. He reminded Americans that power carried responsibility, especially in peace, deliberately. Political leaders saw potential beyond the uniform, while Eisenhower resisted ambition outwardly. He accepted the role of Army Chief of Staff, tasked with reshaping a post-war force. On 19 November 1945, he warned Congress about militarization without purpose. He believed strength must serve stability, not fear or profit firmly. As veterans returned, Eisenhower pushed for integration and fairness within the ranks, cautiously. He knew unity at home underpinned credibility abroad, unmistakably. Privately, advisors urged him toward politics, sensing national trust in his calm. Eisenhower listened but delayed, wary of power's pull. The world was dividing into blocks, and America searched for guardians, anxiously. Eisenhower's wartime restraint now shaped peacetime leadership, quietly. He wrote, reflected, and prepared, though he claimed no plan. The general understood moments of crisis forge unlikely paths, slowly. History was not finished with him, it was repositioning him. On 20 January 1953, Dwight Eisenhower placed his hand on a Bible and became president. The general, who once commanded armies, now commanded a nation. Scarred by war and fear, he carried memories of Europe's ruins into the Oval Office, quietly shaping decisions. Eisenhower rejected reckless confrontation, preferring balance, patience, and containment, deliberately. He warned against unchecked military power, knowing its weight firsthand profoundly. During the early years of the Cold War, Eisenhower sought stability over spectacle, often unseen. He understood leadership meant preventing catastrophe, not provoking it. Behind closed doors, he resisted pressures for endless escalation, trusting restraint. The same steadiness that held Normandy now held the world's fragile peace. Eisenhower believed strength lay in alliances, not dominance, firmly. He invested in infrastructure, education, and deterrence, balancing force and progress. When crises emerged, he remembered the cost of impatience, choosing calm. The general America trusted in collapse became the president it trusted in fear. His legacy was not perfection, but endurance. He proved leadership was not loud, but reliable, especially when everything trembled. When the world seemed ready to fracture again, Eisenhower stood firm once more.